Welcome to the Courage to Live podcast. My name is Josh Bitsko. I'm a retired police captain in Las Vegas with 24 years of experience. Currently, I travel the country and I teach people about courage, resilience, and leadership. On today's podcast, we're going to delve into the phrase, I don't know if you guys have heard it before, but it's leaders are readers. And on the cusp of my book release, I figured this was timely to talk about, a couple things when it comes to leadership, but mainly that leadership is a learned skill, not something you're born with. Now, are there people that have certain qualities that will help them in leadership positions just naturally? Yeah, I think that's there. But all of the best leaders I worked around and worked for took the time to improve their skills as leaders. And because at the end of the day, leadership isn't just about authority, it's about growth. And reading leadership books and even just books about life, it exposes you to perspectives you'd never get in your own circle, right? So you think about it, let's say in law enforcement, for an example, when I promoted, I was a sergeant, I was a lieutenant, I hung around other lieutenants, and oftentimes I found myself around like-minded people. And that can create an echo chamber when it comes to leadership styles and talking about leadership. It doesn't mean I didn't learn from my peers. I absolutely did. And I had people to bounce certain situations off of when they would arise. But at the same time, we can limit ourselves to different perspectives when it comes to leadership. So, books are like peers or mentors that you would never meet in person. And so, but what does reading and learning, what does that build in a leader? Well, first off is it builds wisdom, right? As opposed to just random knowledge. Is if you're reading leadership books, and, I can name off 4 or 5 that I've read over my time. I mean, I definitely read books on a regular basis, but ones that stuck out. You have The Leadership Challenge. You have Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink that I believe is one of the better leadership books that I've ever read. But you can learn from history. You can learn from other people's mistakes, depending on how the book is written. And again, you get that perspective that you normally wouldn't get. These other perspectives and books that you read can help you with empathy, as it broadens your understanding of other people, other cultures, other situations. Like, I've read plenty of leadership books that were military based. And military, although shares some similarities with policing, there's some huge differences too. But it gave me not only a better understanding of myself and a better understanding of leadership, but I also had to lead people that were in the military at one time. And it gave me an insight into their thinking and allowed me to be a little more empathetic to their situation, which is just, again, one example of how reading can give you those other perspectives. It can broaden your vision, right? It gives you new frameworks and ideas for problem solving. It gives you tools to attack problems from a different perspective than you normally would. And ultimately, it can help with clarity. The discipline of reading, just the whole act of sitting down quiet with a book in front of you and only focusing on that, is a skill in and of itself that carries over into being a better leader. We live in a world where, we have a supercomputer in our pockets all the time, and we can switch to scores of sports, to doom scrolling on Instagram, to news stories. There's notifications that come up all the time, and it really can damage our focus. But that skill of reading an actual book is one that people are losing, but it allows you to build that focus and that vision to focus on one task and get it solved when the world around you is trying to pull you in so many different directions. So if we know this, then why don't leaders read? And I've used every one of these excuses before, is I don't have time, right? I don't have time to read. Well, if it's important, you make time for it. If you really want to do it, you'll do it. So that means you don't have to sit down and read an entire book in a sitting, but 5 pages a day over the course of a month is going to get you close to reading, especially these leadership books. And how long does it really take you to read 5 pages? Putting 10 minutes a day into reading about leadership or even just history or something that you enjoy it beats nothing because that consistency matters more than the volume. When you have the people that just don't like reading. So for me, there's times I would go in my life that, I was working so much, then I was tired. The second I'd sit down and try and read, my eyes were falling asleep. So I got an Audible account and I started listening to books when I was working out, when I was driving, and I would start listening to these books and I'd pull out my notes and take a couple notes if something stuck out to me. So even if, you don't like to read or you don't necessarily, you're so busy, you don't have time to fit it in, even though we all have enough time to do this, audiobooks are a good substitute. Most dangerous reason that current leaders don't read is they start to buy their own BS and they think they already know everything they need to know as a leader is concerned. And so they don't make space for learning new theories, learning new ideas. I'm going to call back to a conversation I just recently had with retired Sheriff Doug Gillespie. He's retired. He does travel the country and speak from time to time, but really he's just spending time with his family and relaxing after a stressful job of being the sheriff of Las Vegas for multiple terms. And during that conversation, he started telling me about a book he was reading about leadership and how good a book it was, and he wanted to share it with me. So this is one of the most accomplished leaders that I've ever worked around. He was an amazing leader when he was at Las Vegas Metro, and I learned, he was a mentor of mine, and I learned so much from him. And he's still reading leadership books far into his retirement. So that idea that you already know, you can't learn something you already think you know. So you have to be open to it. So a couple things I'm going to leave you with is when you read with a purpose. For me, I'll rotate between a leadership book, a history book, right? Maybe something about personal growth, and then I'll mix in something fun. I always like the pulpy horror books that, just like what I grew up on, like the Stephen Kings and the Dean Koons. So I'll work that in too to keep things fresh, but I always read with a purpose. And then applying what you read. So another thing is we often get overwhelmed by reading this giant leadership book that have all these theories. What I'll say is take one thing from the book that you're reading and try and apply it into your life, into your leadership style. That is a great tactic. Again, it's a consistent theme what I talk about in this podcast is small steps equal big results. Over the course of your career, if you've read 30 books and you take one thing from each of those books and practice applying it in your life, imagine the leader that you'll become by the end of it. So I just want to thank you guys for spending some time with me today. If you enjoyed the podcast and what I talked about, please share it, subscribe, talk about it with a friend. Thank you again, guys.